The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger as the stagecoach rattled towards Silverpine, bringing with it the woman who would change everything for the town's most reclusive rancher. Tessa Grayson clutched her worn leather satchel tighter as the wooden wheels hit another rut in the road, sending her petite frame bouncing against the hard bench seat. The year was 1878, and the promise of a teaching position in this remote Montana town had been her last hope after losing everything back east. "Almost there, madam," the driver called down. "Silverpine just ahead." Tessa adjusted her simple blue bonnet and peered through the small window. After 3 days of grueling travel, her body ached, her throat felt parched from the dust, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But she couldn't afford weakness now. At 23, she had already endured more tragedy than most faced in a lifetime. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in what passed for the town center, a dusty main street, lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. A general store, saloon, small church, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office marked Silverpine as barely more than an outpost. Nothing like the thriving community described in the correspondence that had brought her here. "Silverpine," the driver announced, climbing down to open the door. Tessa gathered her skirts and stepped carefully to the ground, her legs unsteady after the long journey. She was the only passenger disembarking here, and as the driver unloaded her trunk containing all her worldly possessions, she felt the curious stares of townsfolk pausing in their activities to observe the newcomer. "Are you certain this is Silverpine?" she asked, trying to keep the dismay from her voice. "Yes, madam. End of the line for you." She nodded her thanks and paid him the last of her coins before turning to face her new reality. The school building should be her first destination to meet with the town council members who had hired her. Brushing dust from her navy traveling dress, she approached an elderly man sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store. "Excuse me, sir. Could you direct me to the schoolhouse? I'm the new teacher." The man's weathered face creased in confusion. "New teacher. Don't know nothing about that. Miss Schoolhouse burned down about 3 months back." "Burned down?" Tessa's stomach dropped. "But I was hired by the town council. I have letters." She fumbled in her satchel for the correspondence that had promised employment and accommodation. "Town council disbanded after the fire, miss. Mayor Higgins packed up and left for Denver with what was left in the treasury." The blood drained from Tessa's face as the implications became clear. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles for a position that no longer existed, spent her last dollars on the journey, and now stood in a strange town with nowhere to go and no means to leave. "Is there a hotel where I might stay?" she asked, forcing composure into her voice. "Boarding house closed last winter. Saloons got rooms, but—" The old man's voice trailed off as he glanced toward the establishment where raucous laughter spilled onto the street. No respectable woman would consider such accommodations. As the stagecoach rattled away behind her, Tessa fought rising panic. She couldn't return east, not that there was anything to return to after her parents' deaths and the bank's foreclosure on their home. The next town was 2 days' ride away, and she had no horse, no money for passage. "You all right, miss?" The old man was watching her with concern. "Yes, thank you, I just need to." What could she possibly do now? As Tessa stood paralyzed with indecision, a commotion at the far end of the street drew her attention. A man on horseback had ridden into town, a magnificent chestnut stallion beneath him. Unlike the other men visible on the street, miners, laborers, and shopkeepers, this rider carried himself with quiet confidence. His broad shoulders were draped in a worn leather duster, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. The old man beside her straightened. "That there's Samuel Lockhart. Owns the Double L Ranch outside town. Keeps to himself mostly, comes in for supplies once a month." Tessa barely registered the information, too consumed with her own predicament. She would need to find work immediately, but in a town this small, options would be severely limited for a woman alone. The rancher dismounted with fluid grace, tying his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. As he approached, she stepped aside, not wishing to block his path. He nodded politely as he passed, then paused, his gaze dropping to her trunk sitting forlornly in the street. just arrived?" he asked, his voice deep and rich like aged whiskey. "Yes," Tessa replied, unwilling to elaborate on her misfortune to a stranger. He might have continued into the store, but something in her expression must have betrayed her distress. He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind rather than age. "Samuel Lockhart," he introduced himself with a slight bow of his head. "Tessa Grayson," she replied automatically, then added, "I was to be the new teacher, but it seems I've come on a fool's errand. The school is gone," understanding dawned in his eyes. "The fire, news travels slow out here, indeed." She forced a smile. "I shall have to formulate another plan." "You have family nearby?" "No, no one at all, actually." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but exhaustion was wearing down her defenses. Samuel glanced at the saloon, then back at her trunk, clearly understanding her predicament. He shifted his weight, seeming to debate something internally before speaking. "My ranch is about 5 miles out of town. I have a spare room, was my sister's before she married and moved to Oregon." He spoke carefully, as if measuring each word. "It's a respectable offer, Miss Grayson. I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, who lives in the main house as well. You'd have privacy and safety until you decide your next steps." Tessa studied him, searching for any hint of impropriety in his offer. She found none, only genuine concern in those gray eyes. Still, she hesitated. Accepting accommodation from a man she had just met went against everything she had been taught about propriety. "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. The room sits empty and—" He paused, something vulnerable flashing across his face. "I know what it's like to be stranded with nowhere to turn." Before she could respond, the saloon doors burst open and 3 men stumbled out, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. Their loud voices and leering glances toward her made the decision suddenly clear. "Thank you, Mr. Lockhart. I accept your kind offer, at least until I can arrange alternative employment." Relief flickered across his features. "Good. Let me finish my business at the store and we'll head out. Mrs. Abernathy will have supper waiting." As Samuel disappeared into the store, Tessa tried to make sense of this unexpected turn of events. She had come west, seeking independence and a fresh start, not to become dependent on a stranger's charity. Yet something about Samuel Lockhart's quiet strength, and the clear respect shown by the townspeople as they nodded in his direction, reassured her. Within 30 minutes, Samuel had completed his purchases, loaded her trunk onto his wagon that had been parked behind the store, and helped her onto the bench seat beside him. The chestnut stallion was tethered to follow behind. As they left Silverpine behind, the vastness of the Montana landscape unfolded before them. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. The beauty was breathtaking, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia where Tessa had grown up. "It's magnificent," she breathed, momentarily forgetting her troubles. Samuel glanced at her, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "That it is first time out west?" "Yes. I've never seen so much space. Takes some getting used to. Some folks find it overwhelming." "Not overwhelming," she corrected. "Freeing." Something in her answer seemed to please him, though he said nothing more as they traveled. Tessa was grateful for the silence. It gave her time to collect herself, to begin forming a plan. She would stay at the ranch only as long as necessary to earn enough for passage to a larger town, Helena, perhaps, or even Denver, where a qualified teacher might find proper employment. The Double L Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent, a sprawling main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses in various stages of training. It was larger and more prosperous-looking than Tessa had expected. "You live here alone?" "Besides Mrs. Abernathy, I mean." "And the ranch hands," Samuel nodded. 6 men who work the cattle and horses. They have a bunkhouse beyond the barn." As the wagon approached, a stout woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her face lit with curiosity at the sight of Tessa. "Mrs. Abernathy," Samuel called as he brought the wagon to a stop. "We have a guest who will be staying with us for a while." Miss Grayson was to be Silverpine's new teacher, but arrived to find the school gone. The housekeeper's expression shifted from surprise to sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. Come inside and get yourself settled. You look ready to drop from exhaustion." Samuel helped Tessa down from the wagon, the brief contact of his strong hands at her waist sending an unexpected flutter through her stomach. She attributed it to hunger and fatigue, nothing more. "I'll bring your trunk," he said, already moving to the back of the wagon, Mrs. Abernathy guided Tessa into the house, chattering about dinner preparations and how long it had been since they'd had a female guest. The interior of the ranch house surprised Tessa with its comfortable furnishings and signs of refinement. Books lined shelves in the main room, and landscape paintings adorned the walls. "Mr. Lockhart's sister's room is through here," Mrs. Abernathy explained, leading her down a hallway. "Hasn't been used in 2 years, but I keep it dusted and aired out regular-like." The bedroom was simple but lovely, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a chest of drawers topped by a porcelain washbasin. It was far more comfortable than Tessa had dared hope for. "This is very kind," she said, removing her bonnet. "I won't impose for long. As soon as I can find work." "Nonsense," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "You're welcome here as long as needed. The master wouldn't have it any other way." Samuel appeared in the doorway, carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. He set it carefully at the foot of the bed, then straightened, seemingly uncomfortable in the feminine space. "Supper in an hour," he said. "Rest if you'd like. The washroom is down the hall if you want to freshen up." With that, he departed, leaving Tessa alone with Mrs. Abernathy. "He's a good man," the housekeeper said softly. "Keeps to himself mostly since his wife passed 5 years back." Tessa hadn't expected this information. "I'm sorry to hear that." Consumption took her, just a year after they married. He threw himself into building this ranch after. Barely speaks more than necessary now. Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. "First time I've seen him bring anyone home. You must have made quite an impression." "I think it was more pity than impression," Tessa said, uncomfortable with the implication. "Samuel Lockhart doesn't do anything out of mere pity, miss. Remember that." With those cryptic words, the housekeeper left Tessa to settle in. Alone, Tessa sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She had arrived in Silverpine full of hope for a new beginning, only to have those hopes dashed within minutes. Now she found herself dependent on the kindness of a stranger, a handsome, mysterious widower, who lived in isolation with only his ranch hands and housekeeper for company. It was not the fresh start she had envisioned, but as she gazed out the window at the magnificent landscape bathed in the golden light of sunset, Tessa felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of possibility. Supper that evening was a simple but hearty affair: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Samuel ate mostly in silence, while Mrs. Abernathy kept conversation flowing, telling Tessa about the ranch and the surrounding area. Tessa learned that the Double L was known for breeding and training some of the finest horses in the territory, and that Samuel had built it from almost nothing after returning from the war. "Which regiment did you serve with, Mr. Lockhart?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious. Samuel looked up, surprised by the direct question. "6th Michigan Cavalry, under Custer at Gettysburg." Tessa nodded. "My father was with the 4th Pennsylvania." He spoke highly of the Michigan cavalrymen. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening, perhaps. "Your father returned from the war." "Yes, though never the same. He died 2 years ago, complications from an old wound that never properly healed." "I'm sorry for your loss." The simple words carried weight coming from him, a man who clearly understood loss intimately. After dinner, Samuel excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Tessa to help Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes despite the older woman's protests. "He seems solitary," Tessa observed as they worked. "By choice, not circumstance," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Plenty of widows and unmarried ladies in the territory who'd welcome his attention, but he's shown no interest. The ranch is his life now." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Tessa tried to organize her thoughts. She would need to find employment quickly. She couldn't live on charity indefinitely, no matter how genuine the offer. Perhaps there were families in the area who needed a governess, or she could offer to help in the general store. Tomorrow, she would discuss options with Samuel and Mrs. Abernathy, who would know the possibilities better than she. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the exhaustion of travel and emotional turmoil finally claiming her. The following morning, Tessa woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting under her door. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in one of her two remaining presentable dresses, a simple blue cotton with white piping, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Abernathy was alone, bustling around the stove. "Good morning, dear. Samuel's been up since before dawn." One of the hands came to fetch him. That mare finally decided to foal. "Is everything all right?" "Oh, I expect so. Samuel has a way with horses like I've never seen. They trust him." She placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Tessa. "Eat up now. We need to put some meat on those bones." Tessa complied, realizing she was famished. As she ate, she broached the subject of employment. "I was wondering if you knew of any work available in the area. I'm qualified as a teacher, of course, but I have experience with bookkeeping as well. My father insisted I learn." Mrs. Abernathy paused in her work. "Bookkeeping, you say?" "Yes, I managed my father's accounts after he became ill." "Well now, that's interesting." The housekeeper sat across from her. "Samuel was just saying last week how the ranch books are in a terrible state. He's a fine rancher but has no head for figures. Been putting off hiring someone from Helena to sort it out." Hope flickered in Tessa's chest. "Do you think he might consider me for the task? Worth asking. He'll be back for dinner at midday. You can speak with him then." Eager to prove her usefulness, Tessa spent the morning helping Mrs. Abernathy with household chores, learning the layout of the ranch house, and familiarizing herself with the daily routine. The housekeeper's initial reserve quickly melted into warm conversation as they worked side by side. Samuel returned just as they were setting the table for the midday meal, his clothes bearing evidence of his morning's work with the horses. He looked tired but satisfied. "Healthy filly," he announced as he washed up at the kitchen pump. "Strong legs. She'll make a fine cutting horse someday." "That's wonderful news," Tessa said, genuinely pleased. "I'd love to see her if that would be permitted." Samuel looked at her with surprise, droplets of water still clinging to his face. "You're interested in horses? My grandfather raised them in Pennsylvania." "Not on this scale, of course, but I spent many happy summers helping with the foals." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "I'll take you to see her after dinner if you'd like." Over the meal, with gentle prompting from Mrs. Abernathy, Tessa gathered her courage and made her proposal. "Mr. Lockhart, I understand you might be in need of someone to organize your accounts." She kept her voice steady, professional. "I have experience with bookkeeping and would be happy to offer my services in exchange for room and board while I decide my next steps." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "It's tedious work, years of receipts and figures to sort through." "I don't mind tedious work, sir, and I'd prefer to earn my keep rather than accept charity." He nodded slowly. "Very well, we can discuss terms after I show you the filly. The books are in my study." After dinner, true to his word, Samuel led Tessa to the barn where the new mother and foal were resting. The filly was indeed beautiful chestnut like her sire with a white blaze down her face. "She's lovely," Tessa said softly, careful not to disturb the pair. "She is." Samuel's voice held genuine affection. "I've been breeding this line for 3 years. She's the first filly from my best stallion. Does she have a name yet?" "No, I usually wait a few days, see what fits their personality." Tessa watched as he approached the stall, speaking in low, soothing tones to the mare who nickered in recognition. The tenderness with which this strong, taciturn man treated the animals revealed a depth of character that intrigued her. When they returned to the house, Samuel led her to his study, a room she hadn't yet seen. Unlike the neat organization of the rest of the house, this space was cluttered with papers, ledgers, and maps. A large desk dominated the room, its surface barely visible beneath the disarray. "As you can see," he said with a hint of embarrassment, "I've let things get away from me." Tessa surveyed the chaos with a practiced eye. "It's nothing that can't be put right with system and patience. May I?" She gestured toward the nearest ledger. He nodded, and she opened it, scanning the entries. The handwriting varied, some precise and methodical, likely from his previous bookkeeper, and some hastier notes that she assumed were Samuel's own additions. I could organize these chronologically first, then separate expenses by category: breeding stock, feed, equipment, household expenses, and so on. Once everything is properly categorized, we can assess the ranch's financial position more accurately. Samuel watched her with growing respect as she outlined her approach. "You know your business, Miss Grayson. Tessa, please. If we're to work together, such formality seems unnecessary." He hesitated only briefly. "Samuel, then." They agreed that Tessa would work on the accounts for 4 hours each day in exchange for her room and board, with the understanding that the arrangement was temporary until she found more permanent employment. Yet as she began sorting through the first stack of papers that afternoon, Tessa couldn't help feeling that she had found exactly where she was meant to be. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, afternoons devoted to bringing order to Samuel's financial records, and evenings often passed in the main room where Samuel would read while Tessa mended clothing or worked on letters to contacts in larger cities, inquiring about teaching positions. Gradually, Samuel began to open up. It started with simple conversations about the ranch's operations as she asked questions to better understand the accounts. Then one evening, as a thunderstorm raged outside, he spoke of his late wife, Elizabeth, who had come west with him full of dreams for their future. "She loved it here," he said, gazing into the fire. "Saw beauty in everything, even the harshest winter days. Said it made her feel alive in a way the city never did." "She sounds remarkable," Tessa replied softly. She was. His voice carried no bitterness, only a gentle sorrow. "When she died, I thought I'd sell up, move on. Couldn't imagine staying in the place we'd planned to build together. But then I realized this ranch was the last dream we shared. Couldn't let it go. So you built it for her memory." He looked at her then, something vulnerable in his gaze. "At first, now, it's become my own dream too." As June turned to July, Tessa found herself increasingly drawn to this complex man. She admired his quiet strength, his kindness toward his animals and workers, the way he listened intently when she spoke as if her words truly mattered. She began to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression, how the corner of his mouth would lift slightly when amused, the way his brow furrowed when concerned. For his part, Samuel seemed to find reasons to be near her. He started taking his coffee in the study while she worked on the books, ostensibly to answer any questions she might have. He invited her to ride with him to check the north pasture, teaching her about the ranch's operations. When she mentioned missing her father's library, books from his personal collection began appearing in her room, novels and poetry she hadn't seen on the main shelves. Mrs. Abernathy watched these developments with knowing eyes, but said nothing, though Tessa often caught the older woman hiding a smile when Samuel lingered over breakfast to hear Tessa's plans for the day. One sweltering afternoon in late July, Samuel found Tessa in the study, surrounded by neatly organized stacks of paper. "How goes the battle?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Tessa looked up with a smile. "Nearly won, I think. I've reconciled all the accounts through May. The ranch is in excellent financial health, by the way. Your horse breeding program is particularly profitable." "Good to hear." He hesitated, then added, "I received a letter today from Helena. The territorial supervisor for schools is expanding education initiatives. They're looking for qualified teachers." Tessa's heart sank. She had been so absorbed in life at the Double L that her search for a teaching position had become increasingly half-hearted. The thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang of loss. "That's wonderful news," she managed, not meeting his eyes. "Is it what you want, to teach in Helena?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. "It's what I came west to do," she replied carefully. "To teach," Samuel nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll send a response tomorrow if you'd like to pursue it." "Thank you. I should consider it carefully first." He left her then, and Tessa stared at the ledger before her, no longer seeing the figures. The prospect of leaving the ranch, leaving Samuel, filled her with a sadness she hadn't anticipated. In just 2 months, this place had begun to feel like home, and its taciturn owner had come to occupy a special place in her heart. That evening, unable to sleep, Tessa slipped outside to the porch. The night was clear, the sky ablaze with stars in a way she'd never seen in Philadelphia. She was so entranced by the view that she didn't hear Samuel approach until he spoke. "Couldn't sleep," she started slightly, then smiled as he joined her at the railing. "It's too beautiful to miss." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch, distant nickering of horses, the call of a nighthawk washing over them. "I've been thinking about your teaching opportunity," Samuel said finally. "Have you?" She tried to keep her voice neutral. "Helena's a growing city, good place for a young woman with your talents." "Yes, I suppose it is." Another silence fell, heavier this time. "The thing is, Tessa." He rarely used her given name, and it sent a shiver through her to hear it in his deep voice. "The ranch books have never been in better order. I'd hate to see that work undone." She turned to look at him, trying to understand what he was really saying. "Are you offering me permanent employment as your bookkeeper?" "Not exactly." He shifted, uncharacteristically uncertain. "The ranch needs more than a bookkeeper. It needs someone who sees its beauty even on the hardest days, someone who makes it feel like a home again." Tessa's breath caught as he turned to face her fully, moonlight illuminating the earnest expression on his face. "I know it's too soon," he continued. "We've known each other barely 2 months, but I find myself dreading the day you'll leave, Samuel." His name was barely a whisper on her lips. "I'm not asking for promises, just asking if you might consider staying longer. Getting to know each other better without the pressure of impending departure." The vulnerability in his request touched her deeply. This proud, self-sufficient man was opening his heart, however cautiously, and the courage of that act wasn't lost on her. "I've come to care for this place," she admitted, "and for the people here." His eyes held hers, searching. "Enough to postpone Helena?" "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Enough for that." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, rare and breathtaking. Without conscious thought, Tessa reached up to touch his cheek, the rasp of his evening stubble against her palm sending warmth through her entire body. Samuel covered her hand with his own, turning slightly to press a kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "We should probably go inside," he said softly, "before Mrs. Abernathy has cause to question your reputation." Tessa laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. "Yes, I believe she's already quite suspicious of our intentions." "Smart woman, Mrs. Abernathy." As they returned to their respective rooms, Tessa felt lighter than she had in years. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since arriving in Silverpine, that uncertainty felt like promise rather than threat. The change in their relationship was subtle but unmistakable. Samuel began joining Tessa and Mrs. Abernathy for breakfast each morning, no longer rushing out to work before Tessa awoke. He found reasons to visit the study while she worked, bringing her interesting findings from the ranch or news from town. In the evenings, they would often sit together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. August brought the county fair in a larger town 20 miles away, and Samuel surprised Tessa by asking if she would accompany him. "I'm entering Thunder in the stallion competition," he explained, referring to his prize chestnut. "Thought you might enjoy the outing." The fair was a riot of color and sound after the quiet of the ranch food vendors, games of chance, livestock competitions, and a dance planned for the final evening. Tessa delighted in it all, especially watching Samuel's quiet pride as Thunder took first prize in his category. "You've built something remarkable," she told him as they walked among the exhibits. "Everyone here respects your work." He shook his head modestly. "Just doing what I love." "That's precisely why it's remarkable." As dusk fell, musicians began setting up for the dance. Samuel hesitated, then turned to Tessa. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. "I should warn you, I'm not particularly accomplished," she admitted, his eyes crinkled with amusement. "Fortunate, as neither am I, what they lacked in skill they made up for in enjoyment." Samuel proved to be a better dancer than he claimed, guiding her confidently through waltzes and reels. During a lively polka, he pulled her closer than strictly proper, his hand warm at the small of her back. "People are watching," she murmured, though not pulling away. "Let them," he replied. "I'm escorting the most beautiful woman at the fair. Why wouldn't they look?" The compliment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, brought color to her cheeks. In that moment, surrounded by music and laughter, Tessa acknowledged to herself what her heart already knew: she was falling in love with Samuel Lockhart. The night air was cool as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Tessa wrapped in a blanket beside Samuel on the wagon bench. Thunder followed behind, occasional snorts punctuating the comfortable silence. "Thank you for today," she said finally. "It was wonderful. Even when I stepped on your toes during that last waltz," she laughed. "Even then." They crested a hill, and the lights of the Double L Ranch house came into view in the distance, a warm beacon in the darkness. "Looks like home, doesn't it?" Samuel said softly. Tessa's heart swelled at the word. "Yes, it does." He glanced at her, then back to the road. "Tessa, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "Yes. The fall cattle drive starts next week. I'll be gone for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks depending on the weather." Oh, she hadn't considered what his ranch duties might entail in terms of separation. "I'll miss you." The simple admission seemed to give him courage. "When I return, would you allow me to court you properly, with the intention of—" He cleared his throat, "with serious intentions." Tessa turned to look at him, barely able to make out his features in the darkness. "Are you certain?" "I came here with nothing, Samuel. No dowry, no family connections. I don't care about any of that," he interrupted. "I care about you, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you've brought life back into my home, into me." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Then yes, I would welcome your courtship." His sigh of relief was audible, and he reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in what was becoming a cherished gesture between them. The days before Samuel's departure passed in a blur of preparation. The cattle drive would take the ranch's entire male workforce, leaving only Mrs. Abernathy and Tessa to manage the household and care for the remaining horses. Samuel spent hours instructing Tessa on various aspects of the ranch's daily operations, clearly torn between his responsibilities and his reluctance to leave her. On the morning of his departure, they shared a private moment on the porch as dawn broke over the mountains. "I'll write when we reach Helena," he promised. "The supply wagon makes runs between here and town every few days. Mrs. Abernathy will make sure you get my letters." "Be safe," Tessa said, unable to hide her worry. "I've heard cattle drives can be dangerous." "I've been doing this for years," he assured her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Nothing to worry about." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers, their first kiss, sweet and tender and over too quickly. He pulled back, studying her face as if memorizing it. "Something to remember on the trail," he said with a small smile. Then he was gone, riding out with his men and 300 head of cattle bound for the railroad at Helena. Tessa watched until they disappeared over the distant ridge, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss lingered. Life at the ranch settled into a different rhythm without Samuel and the hands. Tessa took on additional responsibilities, checking the horses each morning and evening, helping Mrs. Abernathy preserve the late summer harvest from the kitchen garden, and continuing her work on organizing the ranch's business affairs. Samuel's first letter arrived 4 days after his departure, carried by the supply wagon driver. His handwriting was strong and clear, much like the man himself. "Dearest Tessa, the drive proceeds well. Weather favors us so far. The men joke that I'm poor company this year, my thoughts constantly turning back to the ranch to you. I find myself watching the sunrise and wondering if you're seeing the same colors from the porch. At night, the stars remind me of the evening of the fair and how the lamplight caught in your hair as we danced. I've never been a man of many words, as you well know, but distance seems to loosen my tongue, or my pen, rather. I miss our conversations, your laugh, the way you challenge my thinking with your questions. We should reach Helena within 5 days if all continues smoothly. The return journey will be quicker without the cattle to herd. Until then, I remain, Yours, Samuel Tesser. Read the letter 3 times, treasuring each word. She had never expected such eloquence from Samuel, whose daily communication tended toward the practical and direct. This glimpse into his inner thoughts felt like a precious gift. She wrote back immediately, describing life at the ranch in his absence, sharing amusing anecdotes about Mrs. Abernathy's attempts to teach her to make proper biscuits, and admitting her own feelings of missing him. The letter exchange continued throughout his absence, each missive deepening their connection despite the physical distance. 2 weeks stretched into nearly 3 as unexpected rains delayed Samuel's return journey. When the ranch hands finally rode into view one crisp September afternoon, Tessa could barely contain her excitement. She stood on the porch, watching as Samuel dismounted, issuing final instructions to his men before turning toward the house. His face, tanned even darker from weeks in the open air, broke into a wide smile when he saw her. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, then stopped just short of embracing her, suddenly conscious of the ranch hands still within view. "Welcome home," Tessa said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. "It's good to be back." His eyes never left hers, communicating what propriety prevented him from expressing physically. That evening, after Samuel had bathed and changed from his trail clothes, they sat together on the porch swing. The first chill of autumn hung in the air, giving Tessa the perfect excuse to sit closer to him than she might have otherwise dared. "The drive was successful?" she asked. "Very." "Got a better price than expected for the cattle." He seemed distracted, his fingers gently playing with hers where their hands met between them. "I rode into town before coming home, had some business to attend to." "Oh," she looked up at him curiously. "I spoke with Reverend Phillips." Tessa's heart began to race. "Did you?" Samuel turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I know we agreed on a proper courtship, and I intended to honor that, but these weeks away from you. Tessa, I don't want to waste any more time." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's," he said, tipping a delicate gold ring with a small pearl into his palm. "Not fancy, but she always said it brought her happiness in her marriage." Tessa stared at the ring, then at Samuel's face, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "I love you, Tessa Grayson," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that first day when you stood in the street looking lost but determined. You've brought joy and purpose back into my life, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days trying to bring the same to you." Tears filled her eyes as he continued. "Will you marry me, be my wife, my partner in all things?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Samuel." "I love you too." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cradled her face in his hands and kissed her properly this time, with all the passion and tenderness he'd held in check for months. Tessa melted into him, her arms circling his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Reverend Phillips said he could perform the ceremony whenever we're ready." Tessa laughed softly. "Rather confident of my answer, weren't you?" "Hopeful," he corrected. "Though Mrs. Abernathy assured me I had nothing to worry about. Did she now?" Tessa shook her head in amusement. "And when did you consult with her? Before I left, wanted her blessing?" His expression grew more serious. "I know it's not the same as having your parents' approval," but Tessa stopped him with a gentle finger to his lips. "My parents would have loved you, Samuel, and I think they would be happy knowing I've found someone who cares for me as you do." They were married 3 weeks later in Silverpine's small church, rebuilt since the fire that had inadvertently brought Tessa to Montana. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to see the woman who had captured the heart of their reclusive rancher. Tessa wore a simple ivory gown that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make, with Samuel's mother's lace veil carefully restored for the occasion. Samuel, unrecognizable in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The vows were traditional but spoken with deep personal meaning, each word a promise neither took lightly. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared brought cheers from the assembled guests, especially the ranch hands, who had grown fond of Tessa during her months at the Double L. The celebration afterward was joyous tables laden with food contributed by townspeople and neighbors, music from local fiddlers, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Through it all, Samuel rarely let go of Tessa's hand, as if afraid she might disappear if he did. As they rode home in the wagon that night, now husband and wife, Tessa leaned against Samuel's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Completely." She looked up at him, still amazed that this good, honorable man was now her husband. "You know, when I arrived in Silverpine with no place to stay, I thought it was the worst day of my life. And now I know it was the best. Everything that brought me here, even the disappointments and hardships, led me to you." Samuel's arm tightened around her. "To think I almost didn't go into town that day. What made you decide to go?" He smiled, the moonlight catching the silver in his dark hair. "Ran out of coffee. Mrs. Abernathy insisted I couldn't wait another day." Tessa laughed. "Remind me to thank her for her coffee addiction." "I thank her every day," he said seriously. "For that, and for keeping you safe while I was gone on the drive." As the ranch house came into view, lights glowing welcomingly from the windows, Tessa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not in a schoolhouse in Helena or Philadelphia, but here on this wild, beautiful land with the man she loved. Their wedding night was everything Tessa had both anticipated and feared, tender and passionate, with Samuel guiding her gently through this new territory of intimacy. His patience and consideration as he introduced her to physical love only deepened her feelings for him, and by morning, any lingering shyness between them had melted away in the warmth of their shared bed. Life, as Mrs. Lockhart, brought new responsibilities and pleasures. Tessa took over management of the household accounts completely, implemented improvements to the ranch's record-keeping, and even began corresponding with potential buyers for Samuel's horses in eastern cities, using her educated background to advantage in business negotiations. Samuel, for his part, seemed to thrive with Tessa by his side. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and the taciturn man who had first offered her shelter gradually became more open, even jovial at times, especially in the privacy of their home. When spring arrived, bringing with it the one-year anniversary of Tessa's arrival in Silverpine, they celebrated with a picnic beside the creek that ran through the northern edge of the property. As they sat on a blanket beneath a blooming apple tree, Samuel presented her with a small package. "What's this?" Tessa asked, untying the string, "Just a small token, to mark the day." Inside the package was a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "Made it myself." "Been practicing when you thought I was in the barn." He looked almost shy. "Thought you might use it to write our story for future generations." The implication wasn't lost on Tessa. They had spoken of children, agreed they both wanted a family, but the timing had remained undefined. "Samuel," she said carefully, setting the journal aside, "what would you think about starting that family soon?" His eyes widened. "Are you saying?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're expecting a baby in November." The joy that transformed Samuel's features was something Tessa knew she would remember forever. He gathered her into his arms with a whoop that startled birds from the tree above them, then kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" He pulled back to look at her incredulously. "Pleased, Tessa, there aren't words. You've already given me more happiness than I ever thought possible, and now this." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything." The months of Tessa's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Samuel insisted on building a cradle himself, spending evenings carefully crafting it from pine harvested from their own land. Mrs. Abernathy knitted blankets and tiny garments, while Tessa sewed and planned the nursery, a small room adjacent to their bedroom that had once been used for storage. Samuel became even more protective, insisting Tessa rest frequently and hiring additional help for the household so she wouldn't overtax herself. She indulged his concern mostly, though occasionally had to remind him that pregnancy wasn't an illness and that generations of women had managed quite well without such coddling. "Not my woman," he would reply stubbornly. "Not my child." As her body changed, growing round with their baby, Samuel's fascination and desire for her only seemed to increase. He found her beautiful in this new state and told her so often, both in words and in the reverent way he touched her. On a snowy November night, after a labor that lasted from sunset to sunrise, Tessa gave birth to a healthy daughter. Samuel, who had refused to leave her side despite tradition dictating men wait elsewhere, cut the cord himself with shaking hands, then watched in awe as the midwife placed the squalling infant on Tessa's chest. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like her mother." They named her Faith Elizabeth Lockhart Faith for the trust they had placed in each other from the beginning, and Elizabeth to honor Samuel's first wife, a gesture Tessa had suggested, knowing that the memory would always be part of their family history. Faith was a good baby with Samuel's dark hair and Tessa's green eyes, quick to smile and curious about everything. She became the center of their world, though they were careful to nurture their relationship as husband and wife alongside their roles as parents. As Faith grew from infant to toddler, the Double L Ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's breeding program gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as New York to purchase his horses. Tessa's management of the business side allowed him to focus on what he loved most, working with the animals and the land, while she found fulfillment in applying her education to building their future. When Faith was 2, Silverpine finally built a new schoolhouse. The town council, now re-established with Samuel as a respected member, approached Tessa about teaching. "Just 3 days a week," the council chairman explained. "There are 15 children of school age in the area now." Tessa glanced at Samuel, who nodded his encouragement. "If it's what you want," he said. Mrs. Abernathy could watch Faith those days. So Tessa became Silverpine's teacher after all, though in circumstances far different from what she had originally envisioned. She found joy in the work, in sharing her knowledge with eager young minds, while still having ample time for her family and ranch responsibilities. In the spring of Faith's 3rd year, Tessa discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved more difficult than the first, with bouts of illness that lingered well beyond the early months. Samuel insisted she give up teaching temporarily, hiring a young woman from Helena to take her place for the remainder of the term. "The school can wait," he said firmly when she protested. "Your health and our babies can't." His concern proved warranted when, in August, Tessa went into labor 6 weeks early. The hours that followed were the most terrifying of their lives together, as she struggled to deliver their second child while growing increasingly weak. Samuel never left her side, supporting her physically and emotionally through each painful contraction. When their son finally arrived, tiny but with strong lungs, Tessa hemorrhaged severely, losing so much blood that the doctor feared for her life. "Don't you dare leave me," Samuel whispered fiercely as the doctor worked to save her. "Faith needs you. Our son needs you. I need you more than breath." Whether it was his desperate plea, the doctor's skill, or simply her own determination, Tessa survived the ordeal. Recovery was slow weeks of weakness when she could barely hold her newborn son, let alone care for Faith or herself. Samuel proved himself during this time, managing the ranch, caring for Faith, and tending to Tessa with unwavering devotion. He hired additional help, rearranged the household to accommodate her needs, and spent countless nights sleeping in a chair beside her bed, ready to assist at a moment's notice. They named their son Franklin Samuel Lockhart, and as he grew stronger, so did Tessa. By Christmas, though still thinner than before, she had regained enough strength to fully participate in family life again. On Christmas Eve, after Faith and Franklin were asleep, Samuel and Tessa sat before the fire in their bedroom, his arm around her as she leaned against his chest. "I almost lost you," he said quietly, the fear still evident in his voice months later. "But you didn't," she reminded him, turning to cup his face in her hands. "I'm still here." When you were so ill, I kept thinking about that day in Silverpine, how close I came to not stopping. To riding past you standing there with your trunk. Tessa kissed him softly. But you did stop, and look at all that's come from that one moment. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. I offered you a spare room and somehow ended up with everything I never knew I wanted. And I arrived with nowhere to stay and found my way home. She smiled up at him. It seems we saved each other, Samuel Lockhart. That we did, Mrs. Lockhart. That we did. Outside, snow fell gently on the land they both loved, covering the Double L Ranch in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Tessa and Samuel reaffirmed the love that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into a life neither could have imagined when fate first brought them together in a dusty frontier town. In the years that followed, the Lockhart family continued to thrive. Faith grew into a confident young woman with her father's way with horses and her mother's love of learning. Franklin, though small at birth, developed into a sturdy boy with a quick mind and quicker smile. When Tessa was 30, they welcomed another daughter, Florence Rose, completing their family. The Double L became one of the most successful ranches in the territory, known not only for fine horses, but also for progressive farming methods that Samuel implemented with Tessa's research and encouragement. They built a larger home as their family grew, though the original ranch house remained at the heart of the property, a reminder of where their story began. Silverpine grew as well, transforming from the struggling outpost Tessa had first encountered into a proper town with a school, church, doctor's office, and even a small library that she helped establish. Samuel served on the town council for many years, his natural leadership and integrity earning him the respect of all who knew him. Tessa eventually returned to teaching part-time, educating not just children, but also adults who wished to improve their reading and arithmetic. She never regretted the teaching position in Helena that she had declined, for in its place, she had found purpose more fulfilling than she could have imagined. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Tessa with a journal similar to the one he had given her years before, but larger, its leather cover showing the patina of age. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find her own handwriting filling the pages. "The story you started writing when Faith was a baby," he explained. "I found it in your desk drawer unfinished, thought you might want to add the rest now." Tessa leafed through the pages, smiling at the memories recorded in her younger hand, her arrival in Silverpine, Samuel's offer of shelter, their growing love, Faith's birth. "Our beginning," she said softly, "and all that's come after." He kissed her temple. "Thought our grandchildren might like to read it someday." "Grandchildren," Tessa laughed. "Faith is only 16, Samuel. Let's not marry her off just yet." "Never hurts to plan ahead," he replied with a grin. "Besides, the story's still being written." That night, after the celebration with family and friends had ended, Tessa sat at her desk and opened the journal to a blank page. She dipped her pen in ink and began to write. "When I arrived in Silverpine with no place to stay, a cowboy offered his spare room. I could not have known then that he was offering much more: a home, a family, a future filled with love. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness." As Samuel's arms slipped around her shoulders, Tessa leaned back against him, content in the knowledge that their story, begun in uncertainty and blossomed into abiding love, would continue to unfold in the lives of their children and the generations that would follow. The spare room that had once been her sanctuary had become the foundation for a lifetime of happiness, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful destinies.